Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning. Let's get started. We have the first panel by Transform Rural India. It's a topic that's really relevant. I'll hand over to Anish, and he will introduce I'll hand over to Irina and Anish, and they will introduce the panel to you. Transform Rural India works to bring equal opportunities to India's poorest, supporting them in their journey to prosperity, dignity, and better life. I'm going to say that you're going to enjoy this session. Irina, I hand it over to you.
Thank you, John. Welcome, everyone. I'm delighted to introduce to you a panel on how does one create rural jobs. Let me just set it up for you. We're going to do three things. One is everybody in the panel will quickly go around, and we've given them the mammoth task of giving us their insights in 3 minutes each. So let's see how many of them will meet that metric. After the panel has spoken, we will take your questions, and then we'll try and close it off with some final thoughts from a few of the panel members. But before I do that, let me just set it up for you. I think when we talk about rural jobs, we are talking about a huge part of India, and one cannot think of it as a monolith. We obviously have the estimated 125 million farmers, large, medium, small. A lot of the small ones actually now are women. And so it's interesting to see how this whole thing will evolve. These farmers obviously need lower costs. They run one of the riskiest businesses that we know in the country. They need better price realization, and over time, they need to participate in larger value chains so that their incomes increase. And one question is, what are we going to do to help them participate in agri-value chains in a more systematic, deliberate, and value-adding way? But we also have 1/3 of rural India, which is landless. A lot of them are employed in construction. Some of them are part of NREGA. Some of them are, quite frankly, huge in terms of disguised unemployment. And there's a question around what can we do to skill them up meaningfully in a very practical way, and are there any rural jobs for them? And then don't forget the young. There are so many young people in rural India. Many of them have done class 6, class 8. Some of them have done class 10. First generation learners in their family. Very different aspiration. The land is too small now for them to go back into agriculture. Most of them don't want to do agriculture. Their parents don't want them to do in farming. What are these kids going to do? What are the services businesses for them? Is garmenting an option? If you look at China, one of the most fascinating things in China is how much of data tagging is now happening in rural China. So millions of young Chinese are just sitting there and tagging organs. They're tagging eyes and ears and streets. And it's quite fascinating to see new forms of jobs being created in rural China for people like this. So we're going to cover, hopefully, a lot of this in the next 90 minutes. We're going to talk about rural agri chains. We're going to talk about garmenting. We're going to talk about services. And therefore, let me not stand between you and the panel. We're going to request each one of them to share with us, not to moan about what's wrong with rural India, but to share with us the opportunities they see and the 1 or 2 things that they want to see happen differently for our rural citizens and brothers and sisters to be able to capture this opportunity. So Anish, as the co-lead, let me hand over to you. Your 3 minutes start now, and then we'll hand over to the next panelist.
Thanks, Irina. Partly my position would be, called Uli, or if you are generous, wishful, or foolhardy in the Swadesh way. Someone I admire through the 2011 census data on urbanization to confront me that I'm on the wrong side of history. I remember, Irina, in one of your studies, you had said that India will remain over 50% rural till 2050. The present crisis, I guess, will push that by few more years. 70% of the workforce today is rural or linked to rural. What to do with them is a serious question and can't be wished away. Partly our quest for rural jobs is also driven by the unending search for solutions when confronted with the data on manufacturing conundrum. Doubling of rural share in manufacturing output, it is actually now more than 50%, 51% exceeding urban. But around the same time, we saw a decline in manufacturing employment by 4%. So there are obviously favorable conditions for factories to be set up. And these conditions, power, road connectivity, would have only improved in the last decade or so. Then why are labor-intensive MSMEs not coming to rural areas? That's the issue, whether it is extractive or what I'm not very sure about? Or are our supply chains, the production, processing, consumption organized in a manner in which it doesn't make sense for these factories to come to rural areas? I see return of migrant labor, proposals to incentivize industries in rural areas to shift this somewhat. The COVID-linked consumer demand on fresh direct will I give a new life to clocking of carbon miles. And partly, the rural job quest is also driven by frustration. Maybe it's rhetoric, or estimated 8-9 million migrate from rural areas to urban labor markets manufacturing. Rural is younger than ever, median age of just under 28, better educated than ever, 85%, and you made mention of that, 85% have some school time, more aspirational, but the dreams are in cities. Even low paying, staying in cramped rooms, 6 to 180 cubic feet, but now as we are seeing hundreds, 1,000 kilometers trek to their homes. There you go, chimera of better quality jobs outside villages. Worker productivity is a serious drag on our competitiveness. Then it makes more sense to relocate them, not to relocate them. Have them the security of shelter and family. I argued in an idea piece yesterday that COVID has upended some of these, and there are possible tailwinds, social distancing on soft floor, increase in labor costs due to demand supply mismatch, increased provisioning for social security. Same conditions that made Selampur one of the biggest teaching clusters, or enterprising youth from Baka landing as Kali Pili taxi drivers at Delhi airport. 70% of them are from Baka, the taxi drivers. Same things that push for subcontracting, off-book workers, piece workers will make in rural more viable, I guess. To seize this, it has to make for overall supply chain efficiencies and fulfillment of quality demands. To give you an example, the logistics of transporting water and offals, that's 35% by weight in poultry and 3 times costly by volume. To processing near consumption centers just makes no sense. Some of us who are in the business of making rural enterprises happen will urgently need to attend to supply chain efficiencies and quality fulfillment. You know, Irina, it's not rocket science. There is some science in it, but it's not rocket. We did that with mushroom processing for Unilever in a remote village 2 decades back. Skills, fail-safe traceability, trust compact on the upside, downside. It can't be a game of Chit bhi meri, pad bhi meri. This needs to be unshackled. And we will have a role in ensuring transaction governance, contracts enforcement on the ground. We at TRI have built a platform for facilitating franchisors looking for franchisee options in rural India. 2, we have started with Our Foods. We have set up decentralized dalmains. With Sudiksha, we have set up preschools. 2 other companies that I'm associated with, the National Association of Farmer Producer Organizations, the Agro-Enterprise Growth Foundation, are committing and gearing to make this happen on farm produce. Yesterday, in one of the conversations with Big Basket, they were very open to this opportunity, subject to quality and trust parameters, to have FPOs and agri-entrepreneurs run their collection centers, which would include basic processing like sorting, grading, packaging. There is solid work also to back some of this. If you look at, there is a very good study. There's a very good study on secondary agriculture by, in the erstwhile Planning Commission. We had Professor Deshpal Sharma from Ohio, and there were, industry titans like Godrej also, and some blue chip voices involved. This study indicated a lot of work could be easily done near farm, and this will improve farm produce prices, create rural service infrastructure, and create local employment. With agriculture getting center stage with COVID, there was no lockdown on our food, and we had the logistics relatively worked out. I guess we owe to ourselves to make this success. Sadly, it seems, across our political spectrum, there is a bipartisan consensus that's all about relief. Can we not put our might into pivoting rural as launchpad? Secondary agriculture, decentralized franchisee manufacturing will be key to success. And you did mention, China. And the way they have transformed their agro-processing industry, they're linking it to advanced manufacturing platforms, bioprocessing. They're already the leading food ingredients manufacturer and exporter. In some of these, the underlying, the production exceeds, India's production exceeds that of China. And we have decided agroecological advantage in many of them. Some 10 years back, and I was to our surprise, we discovered in Jharkhand, a small sauce manufacturing unit was importing and using imported tomato bricks from China. We can look at other such species, rice mills, poha mills, atta to be done locally. I don't know if there is a commercial argument or all it is only mindless emotional, but we need to try that. And we intend to, at TRI, we are trying to build about 100 youth opportunity facilitation hubs to work with rural youth, returning migrants on business discovery, linking of enterprise opportunities, catering to hyperlocal opportunities. 2 of our partners, development alternatives here. I've been having conversation with Pat, head held high. So we are trying to look at how we could give an impetus to decentralized franchising manufacturing and secondary agriculture. I'll stop here, Irina. Thanks.
Thank you, Anish. You very interesting thoughts, though you did not meet my 3-minute challenge. Anjani, how do you at Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation think about rural?
Hi there, Irina. Was that a question for me? Sorry, I just dialed in like 2 seconds ago. I was having some problems with Zoom.
Yes, if you need time to settle in, it was a question for you, Anjani. Are you up to answering it, or should I move to somebody else and come back to you?
No, I can take a stab at it. Just
Okay,
if you
wonderful.
can just repeat the question.
No, so how do you at the Gates Foundation think about creating rural jobs?
Okay, great. Sorry. Yeah, and again, sincere apologies for dialing in late. And so I'm definitely missed the conversation which has happened so far. Thanks everyone for this opportunity, and I'm looking forward to hearing everyone's thoughts on this topic. The way we think about it is, particularly in light of this conversation, that agri-processing, I will just dive right in, or value-added production. I think that's a key aspect, and this is and therefore the conversation is also very timely. Value-added production or agri-processing, uses one of the key differentiators of this particular sector from others, non-farm sectors, is that it uses agricultural production as an input, and therefore growth in this particular sector tends to both create greater employment opportunities in agriculture, of course, and in the processing sector, and increases the demand for labor in agriculture as well. And this pairing of changes is something we think has a particularly salutary effect both on job creation and wages. And it needs a renewed focus in India. As we all know, less than 2% of fruits and vegetables are processed in India, compared to 20-30% in other emerging markets, and not just developed markets. With that said, I think what we are also learning is that when it comes to creating jobs in rural economies, we also need to think about how the sectors within rural economy interact with each other and with local and regional product markets. So therefore, while we look at individual value chains, we do need to take into account the broader market realities within which a particular value chain operates. That again, now focusing more on the agricultural processing side, we know that in rural economy, almost 60% of rural households depend on non-farm employment for their income. And a significant portion of this non-farm employment comes from food processing or food-related sectors, could be wholesale, processing, logistics, retail, and food service. So again, emphasizes the role of this sector in creating jobs and improving wages in rural economy. Now, coming to what needs to happen, I think the four components that need to be addressed are pretty well known: technology, infrastructure, capital markets, and human capital. These are the four broad dimensions on which, as a country, we need to invest both in the public and private sector. And which essentially then boils down to ownership of productive assets, particularly on the technology and infrastructure side. Now, these productive assets could be in the form of land, access to credit markets, education, transport services, and therefore creating or using agri-processing as a sector to create jobs. One of the key aspects we need to look at is how can we create or make these productive assets either explicitly through private ownership or implicitly through public provision, but it's available to people in rural economies. I would say custom hiring centers is a really great example, which helps increase the productivity of farmers in India. Similarly, on the agri-processing side, creating assets like dryers, mills, and making them accessible to a rural population at scale is a big opportunity in India. And that needs to be combined with human capital. And usually when we think about human capital, the conversation is limited to education and health. But I think that in addition to that, entrepreneurial skills and mentorship is a key aspect. You all know, even in urban markets, creating entrepreneurs is a very uphill battle. And I personally sometimes feel that we do not recognize that entrepreneurship, whether it is in a rural market or an urban market, it's equally challenging. But the level of mentorship and access to entrepreneurial skills that is available in rural economies, or let's just say it's pretty much non-existent in rural economies. And so I think that a renewed emphasis in making those opportunities available in rural economies will be key to creating jobs. And the last thing I would say is, when we look at the agriculture sector in India, or people who are engaged in agriculture sector in India, almost 50% of it is casual labor, which means that there is no specialization of skills, and therefore it is largely a low productivity employment. And so therefore I see a huge opportunity to create specialization, whether it is through models, and some of these models already exist in the country, which can be scaled up, models of creating village entrepreneurs, which are providing different types of services related to agronomy or market linkages, or access to different schemes or financial literacy products to rural entrepreneurs, strengthening that link between creating specialized employment and connecting that to the needs of entrepreneurs in rural economy is a crucial link that I think could be strengthened in India.
Thank you, Anjani. Very helpful. Shankar, you spent years at Rallis looking at value chains in Indian agriculture. What are your thoughts on what one can do to help our farmers get more value from agri-chains?
Sure. Thanks, Irina. What I thought I would do is, rather than talk about some theoretical aspects, let me share a couple of examples or models where I have been associated with. I've been running these for many years now. The first one I want to talk about is our pulses experience around pulses. So if I go back, this is many years ago in the Tata Group, when we sat down and said, what can we do in agriculture, which is good from a nation's point of view, good for farmers, as well as a contribution to agriculture. We zeroed in on pulses. The reason being that those days, we used to import a lot of pulses from countries like Australia and Canada. They grow pulses only to export it to us. And so valuable foreign exchange. But in India, the pulses production was stagnating. And a critical source of protein, the maybe most economical source, and the per capita usage was steadily coming down over several decades. So we said that let's start an initiative whereby we drive pulses productivity, we add value to the farmers, and help the nation to be more self-reliant on pulses. When we did an estimation actually in Tata Strategic Management Group, we said that 15, 20 years hence, this is going to become a big issue for the nation. To cut a long story short, after a very humble pilot with the state of Tamil Nadu on urd dal, today we are in Maharashtra, very big public-private partnership program in MP and Karnataka. And the whole model was, how do we actually work with the farmers, help them to improve yields, quality, as well as optimize the costs, etc. But not stop there, but actually go up the value chain, because one of the issues with farmers was finding the right market and price realization, as you mentioned earlier. So in Tata Chemicals, we said that why don't we launch a safe as well as nutritious pulses for the consumers. And we actually launched a brand. And today, many of us buy Tata Sampann brand of pulses, which is now with Tata Consumer Products. Another example I want to very quickly touch upon, which I'm engaged right now in the Center of Sustainable Agriculture and Farm Excellence for the group again. Here we start from the consumer. So we've taken a variety, which is a low GI rice, and going back all the way back to farmers, working for farmer producer organization. And the idea is that not only we drive value at a farm space, how do we unlock value from byproducts as well as from a branding perspective? Very interesting dimensions are coming through, and working with farmer producer companies, which I believe is the way forward. Government is also putting a lot of thrust around that, but a lot of work to be done in actually making this successful. We know a very small percentage of FPCs today are successful, which are led by one or two people. So given that you've given me a very tight time target, if I were to look at from a rural jobs perspective, I can build on this model and share our experience, which has been very energizing. I would see three elements. One is on the byproducts processing or even value-added products. We need a lot of skill building and jobs coming there. Second is field skills and administration skills, how to run FPOs, which are mostly Section 8 companies, and how do we help them with compliance requirements and administrative skills. Third is around agronomy itself, and digital is today by default. How do we help digital unfold in agri, mechanization, operators for mechanized agriculture, e-payments, and so on. So I would say three dimensions of rural jobs. Lots of opportunities possible, but transformation is required. I'll stop here, Irina. I don't know whether I've done well on time, but I can pick up on any and build it forward. Thanks a lot.
You did very well on time and also on practical insights. Thank you, Shankar. Shashank, shall we move to you? How do you at Development Alternatives see this space?
Thank you so much, Irina, co-panelists and everyone listening in for this opportunity. I'd just like to say a few things at the outset. The first is fairly obvious, which is entrepreneurs create jobs. The second, probably not so, which is that I think we've been ignoring or have not been paying enough attention to what colleagues and I now call entrepreneurs of hope. And the reason we do that is that, we found over the years that even the label of micro-entrepreneur doesn't work anymore. In fact, 2 days ago, the government pushed up the definition, of who is a micro-entrepreneur even higher. And yet, not just through our work, but in village after village, small town after small town, Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, Haryana, anywhere we go, we find that, there are people who put in anywhere between, 5,000 rupees to a couple of lakhs, have started up businesses, create 3, 4, 5, 7 jobs. And it's this category that we're intensely focused on. And it's this category that we believe will create jobs, by the millions. We call them entrepreneurs of hope because there are people in Mirzapur, Lachapati, just outside Mirzapur, young woman who's become an aggregator of vermicompost producers and is responsible almost single-handedly for a marketing operation that now employs over 20 people. Another young lady who runs an ice cream factory. She employs 16 people now, including the thelawalas who go around making ice cream. So the numbers can be huge. It's an average of about 5 entrepreneurs of hope in every village, each creating 3 or 4 jobs. Multiply that across India if you want to, by about 750,000 villages, and you see we're talking about serious numbers. The other thing, more pertinent to the discussion we're having right now on value chains is the whole idea of infusing whatever we're doing with much more by way of social innovation. The best definition I'd come across of social innovation was that it's the creative resolution of apparently conflicting objectives. And, 2 ends of the spectrum that we see with apparently conflicting objectives, the way we see it is, at one end you have big capital, big brands, corporations, etc., wanting to grow. And that's a force that has to be acknowledged. You can't wish that away. And at the other end, you have smaller than the micro, people who aspire to do things, who have the power of entrepreneurship, right? Who can become entrepreneurs. I don't think rural entrepreneurship is all that difficult. It's difficult if you don't know how to unleash it, right? Because that spirit exists. And how can we bring these together? In the example of garments, for example, if we're talking about that value chain, I don't see why things have to necessarily be manufactured in extremely big factories. And one message, and then sent out to the remotest of villages. One message that we've been trying to get out to corporations is that instead of shipping products, kilograms of material, they need to ship intelligence. So it's become a little bit of a mantra where we're arguing ship knowledge, ship products, and of course shape those products locally. And this could be done in value chains such as the agri value chain. It becomes even more bizarre. You have grains that travel thousands of kilometers to be converted into cereals, namkeens, and what have you. And then they're shipped thousands of kilometers back into the rural economy. And that has to change. I mean, frankly, that's one big opportunity, I think, or a jolt that's come out of COVID-19, which I hope will shape things up. And the whole idea is to be inclusive in this, not to recognize that everyone in the ecosystem has a role, right? We really feel, that there's immense potential there in terms of what can be done. We will have to, and to close, I'd be happy to come back with more details or get into a discussion. I think we have to go beyond the limits of logical thinking, right? And look at social entrepreneurship, micro entrepreneurship, entrepreneurs of hope as an entire ecosystem in which we need radical innovation as we go forward. The great thing that gives us confidence is that evidence exists, right? It can be proven that these things work, and we just need to build upon them. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much. I love the terminology of entrepreneurs of hope. Adarsh, how do you at the World Bank see entrepreneurship in rural India?
I think, again, there are multiple views at the World Bank. So it's not a unified view. We work both from the angle from a rural development perspective, which is a slightly different perspective than working on the sort of national MSME ecosystem, which is a slightly different perspective. And I think I'd like to come in from the overall MSME ecosystem perspective. I think there's a risk in phrasing the question as, what do we do about rural jobs? And the risk is that it leads us to sort of directed solutions at the last mile, in terms of actual incentives to industry and firms to locate somewhere, or both financial and tax incentives, or provision of certain support services in rural areas and so on, which there's evidence actually works, but on the margin. That really the structural gaps that are preventing growth of firms in India overall also apply across both urban and rural areas. And without those gaps being addressed, in India as a whole, it will be more challenging to create jobs and sustainable employment through entrepreneurship. So, I think the question I'd like to ask, or I look at it is how do we look at enhancing firm competitiveness and productivity? In India, 99% of firms have less than 10 employees. Unlike in other countries, which has a vibrant private sector, we don't see a correlation between age of the firm and growth. So a firm in India that is 5 years old and 40 years old has the same number of employees. You're not seeing a kind of sort of cycle. And I think, some of the structural gaps there around business environment, regulatory environment, infrastructure and logistics are really, if we don't address that, then directed solutions and incentives to have firms create employment in local area are only going to make a marginal difference on that. Very interesting question in the beginning that Anish asked. Why don't firms locate in rural areas? Meaning, when we see this migrant exodus, bulk of workers are coming from the poorest states in India. So Bihar, rural Bihar, parts of eastern UP, parts of Odisha, and we are seeing big. We can visibly see people moving back, and it's interesting to ask, why do some of the big textile firms, for example, why are they located in Gurgaon and bringing the labor pool from far away and all the attendant costs and labor turnover and so on? Would it be more efficient for them to just locate in these places? And in fact, we asked them this question a couple of years ago, and the answer was pretty illuminating, right? And some of these big companies, one of the biggest companies, they said, listen, you fix Calcutta port and our costs of exporting out of that port, and leave the rest to us. We'll find where in UP and Bihar to locate. I'm just simplifying it. I mean, there were other issues like the regulatory sort of environment and harassment and things, but the firms were flagging that logistical transport cost issue was the biggest bottleneck to sort of locating in these areas. So I think I say that to make the point that we should be careful that the interventions that are required are structural, and the interventions may not be located in rural areas to enhance rural competitiveness. That's one. Second, there are very sector-specific regulatory issues and gaps that hamper competitiveness, of MSMEs, of enterprises across the sector. And I'll just give an example of textiles. In India, there are various sort of regulations that hamper import of man-made sort of textile fibers. And that's the fastest growing sector globally in terms of demand in all the markets, primary export markets globally. And this is, countries like exporting countries, China, Vietnam, even Bangladesh are seeing very high sort of export growth rates in man-made fibers. But in India, due to the regulatory environment, we have sort of protectionist measures against man-made fibers, which makes it difficult for Indian companies to access the best raw materials, man-made fibers being developed globally, specialized fibers. So this just means that around 35% of the global market, our firms are not able to compete. And textiles, as you know, is one of the large MSME sectors, large clusters in places like Tamil Nadu of vibrant MSMEs. So, I think my basic point is that, we need to address these structural gaps, these structural constraints to competitiveness and firm growth. And sort of the rural part of it, directed interventions follows, and evidence shows that directed interventions like those kinds of incentives are actually only effective on the margin. So I'll stop there.
What an interesting point, Adarsh. Thank you. I think your point saying that a lot of Indian companies are dwarfs and not small is independent of whether it's rural or urban, and it comes from the structural barriers that we've created in our country, whether they're regulatory or otherwise. And what an interesting thought that says that it's not the missing entrepreneurs in rural India, it's the structural barriers we've created, independent of whether it's rural and urban India, right? Interesting thought. Jalandhar, as Shahi exports, does this resonate with you? Is this also what you see? Hey, Jalandhar, you're on mute, I think.
Yeah, good morning to all, and thank you for giving the opportunity. It's a very interesting subject, creating quality rural jobs at scale. Now, when we talk about the scale and the rural jobs, I mean, what are the sectors that come to our mind? The sectors that come to our mind are, I mean, first is the agriculture itself. I mean, it's the biggest employer in the country. And after that, it is the textile and apparel. This is the sector which provides the maximum number of jobs. And the jobs which are given by this sector, textile and apparel, is about 49 millions. Out of that, apparel contributes about 13 million jobs. This is the scale that, I mean, this sector can create. Let me tell a small, I mean, some brief about our company, Shahi Exports. It's a little story kind of a thing. This company was established in 1974 by a very enterprising lady, Mrs. Sarla Ahuja, with very few machines and very few workers, I mean, the tailors. And today, this has grown a biggest company in the country as far as the apparel sector is concerned, employing 120,000 workers in directly on our roll and spread over in 9 states. And I mean, the kind of, the exports, the highest exports, that is what, we are doing. There is a small comparison which was given by our ex-VC Niti Aayog, Mr. Arvind Panagaria. He compared Shahi with Reliance, and he said, Reliance is the household name. Shahi, nobody knows as such, because we are exclusively in the international market. And he said the investment made by Reliance in assets is about 110 billions. And the employment generated is 250,000 people. Whereas he said, I mean, the study that he made, he said Shahi invested in assets to the extent of 185 million, which is a fraction of billion. And the employment given is 106,000 that time, 2 years back. And he said, this is the kind of scale that is what is needed. We require more companies like Shahi to come up in India, and particularly for giving the employment as such, because this is a very, very labor intensive kind of industry. The scale that we here given, if Reliance engages one person for the same kind of investment, Shahi engages 252 workers for the same kind of investment. And coming to the rural side as such, as far as the Shahi is concerned, we have 60 factories in 9 states, different states. Out of that, about 30% of our factories are located in rural areas. And this we have taken a more long time back, because thinking that, I mean, of course, initially we set up our industry or the units also in the cities and around the cities as such. But subsequently we realized it is better that, we go towards those areas where the workers are available, because being labor intensive, the stability and the complete engagement and the kind of retention of the workers is very, very important. So that is how we started moving from urban areas to the rural areas, and today about 30% our units are located in rural areas also, and the experience is very good. Now this is the industry which attracts a lot of workers from different states. I mean, basically the migrant workers, they come from Bihar, they come from Odisha, they come from Jharkhand, and I mean, when they come, they stay with us for some time, and the attrition is the biggest problem that we are facing. I mean, every month we have almost 7 to 8% attrition, because these are the young girls. Basically, I mean, 70% of our workers are female workers. So we come from different states, different locations, different remote villages. They come, stay for some time, and thereafter they want to go back, and settle in the life and all that. So that is the reason that, I mean, a lot of attrition is there in this particular industry. So to the second, I mean, there are four factors why this attrition happens now. One is that, they are away from the families. The second one, their food habits are different, when they come to the city, their food habits are different. Then they miss their friends also. They are also not sure what is going to be the future as such. Because of this 4F, that's the family, food, friends, and future. Because of that, the attrition is very, very high, and they go back to their villages as such, There is also, I think, let me also touch upon a very interesting kind of a phenomena. There's always a tussle between capital, there's the financial capital, and the human capital as such. Initially, I mean, the financial capital was centered around the cities and the metropolitan cities and around. This created a lot of issues for the cities as well as, and the migration was, evident as such, But now with this COVID-19 has shown that this is not a good model as such, The factories will have to go back to the villages where the workers are available, where the human capital is available. And this is what I think the path which is shown by this COVID-19, I think we have to adopt this kind of a path. And this being the low investment and highly labor intensive, this industry can go to any place and can really do it. Of course, there are certain issues which are there with the local government. If you can, collaborate with them, those issues can be sorted out. Basically, my suggestion, for taking this industry to the rural area and giving the employment at scale, and particularly to the female workers as such, from the very humble background, this doesn't require, very kind of, highly educated persons. Even the illiterates can also, find job in this particular industry. So what is needed, for attracting this industry is that some of the state governments, they have already come out with various kinds of incentive schemes, like Charcha government, and they are giving 5,000 rupees to 6,000 rupees for a worker for a period of 7 years. I mean, this in per month, they will be giving that much kind of a wage subsidy kind of a thing. Other governments, they are also following similar kind of this thing. This is one attraction. Second attraction would be, if you talk about the Bangladesh, the kind of corporate tax, which is about 12%. Here, of course, the corporate tax is very, very high. But if the industry wants to go to the rural area, I think, maybe the government can think of, having some sort of a relaxation and similar kind of incentive in the corporate tax also, if they can give one. I think industry will definitely go there, and this will be a win-win situation, because already this kind of facility is given to the industries which are set up in SEZ, special economic zones. So why not treat this also when you are going to the rural area and creating employment? Those facilities also could be given to them. I think this industry can transform the complete landscape of our country, and this can become a good engine of growth for the rural economy as such. So I think maybe that when we discuss further, I'll be coming back on this.
Great. Thank you, Jalandhar. I'm sure you also want the government to focus on the rupee and on getting you the right FTAs, because that's what Bangladesh and Vietnam have. But yeah, very, very interesting point. Sanjeev, can I ask you to help us think through this from the lens of retail and the value chains that you've seen in the past and now in iFarm?
Good morning. And let me just quickly pick up from the both my experiences at Cargill and Reliance, and then what we're doing now, in another capacity other than iFarms. So basically, as I see the rural India, there are two big things which are very clear. One is the agriculture sector as such, and the supply chains sort of what emanate from there. And the second is a non-farm element of the business, which is pretty large as well. In fact, as a rural GDP structure, there's a fairly large component of non-farm areas. I'm going to focus my thoughts entirely on agriculture as to how the supply chains could have an impact, how they could, drive this change. Two things come to mind, and that where is the biggest opportunity? So nearly, 3/4 of ag GDP now is focused towards the high value agriculture, like, horticulture value chains, dairy supplies, organic, medicinal plants, honey. And there's a unique benefit in all these areas that the employment intensity is nearly 4 times more than the traditional cereal farming. And the need for processing is significantly higher than a very typical sort of cereal and pulses farming, etc. So there's both a need for the managerial inputs, the capital, and the technology. All of them are required. The problem India has faced always is that somebody mentioned the word near farm, which is extremely important. That the exchange of money at the near farm area is the most important element which can galvanize the rural economy. And that is where I find the fundamental problem in India's whole ecosystem. That every time production is done, so you may have a high production, but if it tends to go to the urban centers for sale, which is where the demand lies, then what's happening is that really the cash is getting exchanged in the urban area, so the employment gets generated there. There's very little happening at the near farm level. The second issue, which typically all these segments have faced over the years, is that because of very little capitalization of agriculture processing at the near farm level, the efforts have been at best sporadic. So we have FPOs, we have some 6,000-7,000 FPOs, another 10,000 are being set up. But really, if you look at the ground level track record of these FPOs, so in theory, they're good, but in practice, extremely difficult because, the talent to run them, to manage the capital and whole gamut of activities which tend to come with an organization is always an issue in these systems. If you look at the self-help groups, multiple other collectives like cooperatives, etc., so that basically remains a continuous challenge. So I've got basically three propositions for this panel as to how the government could look at it very differently. And anything in agriculture, when we talk, is always linked to policy is the core part of it. And really that I would like to address that. So we did a study a little earlier, a couple of months back. And in nearly 7 ministries, there are 126 odd subsidy schemes of supporting the agriculture. So I think the first suggestion I would have, for the government, and obviously there's a lot of rush to support the ag and the various other elements in the economy, is that how do we consolidate, reorganize, and calibrate or rebalance our whole support to the agriculture, that the money that is being spent is well spent. It is being targeted. The capital is going into the right set of areas against a well-honed, practical practitioners, who can see exactly how these value chains might work. So that is one part, which my submission is that government already supports in multiple different ways, almost nearly 3 lakh crores of support each year, with the additionality of support in financial schemes, etc. I think that is one part which I think people have to get together, all the stakeholders really, in terms of working alongside. The second issue is, which I fundamentally in another capacity as, the Agriculture Skill Council, is what I see is that the missing element in all this. So in terms, if you look at the entrepreneurial talent, if you look at the capacity to innovate, create, the ability to to be resilient in terms of fighting out the challenges, and all of them are demonstrating that. But I would really say that 70% of India, which is, residing in the rural area, so at a micro level, at an operational decision point as to, whether I spend this 5 rupees or not, is they're good at. But structurally to build up anything of substance, whether in a, they are themselves or they're hiring one person, or they want to build up an enterprise of 5 or 7 people, I think that capacity is woefully inadequate, and for 3 reasons. One, that they don't have the capital and the means to sustain an organization or even work towards it. They don't have the regulations are not supportive at all. So either you have no regulations or there's too much of regulations, there are challenges around that. But the biggest piece is that they lack the skills to drive it. And I think there should be a massive effort in terms of really reorganizing these skills, or bringing a very practical perspective as to how, whether you have to, process pulses at the farm gate level, or, you have to set up a horticulture operation of very insignificant size also, it does not matter. But, simple act of sorting and grading and, putting the understanding quality, or understanding how the money sort of moves and understanding a very little bit of accounting, etc. I think that is where we need a lot of innovation, which has to drive this growth of jobs in the rural economy. And I think that is where the massive effort on skilling on practical side of it, not just sort of working towards simply doing some classroom or theoretical work. So there's a tremendous amount of work which is happening in the skill ecosystem, so which is very positive development of last couple of years, and I think that needs to be further galvanized. That how do we build up a collaborative structures, between not-for-profits, between which are active on the ground level, the private sector, which is both spending mega money on the CSR funding, and even the smaller enterprises which have got a genuine stake in building those value chains. And I think this urban-rural sort of collaboration, I think, is extremely important. That how it evolves in terms of the skill development to genuinely connect supply to the demand side. And I think the day we sort of do that effectively, it can make a big difference. And my last point is that, and I think you mentioned that, Irina, in the beginning, is that women are such a critical component of the entire system as we run in the country. And I think that's where I find the big issue is that, partly regulations, and I don't want to belabor that point too much, is that women have become absolutely core and germane to the entire entrepreneurship in the high value agriculture. So whether we look at horticulture, whether we look at dairy as a segment, whether we look at any of the areas in which the farmers are active, women are playing absolutely critical role in the whole process. And yet we find that how to sort of mainstream their effort, how to build up a structure where they're able to contribute effectively, and not just contribute effectively, but be able to be the managers of their own enterprise. Because as the experience on the self-help group shows, that their ability to self-organize themselves, be disciplined borrowers, and more importantly, being extremely disciplined and ethical payback people in terms of so that the NPAs and all that are much lesser. So to summarize, at 3 levels, I'm suggesting: A, focus on high value agriculture, which is largely around horticulture, medicinal, organic, beekeeping, etc., which are both technology, capital, and management requirement. Focus in a big ticket way on skill development to truly bring these enterprises closer to the market, and they, rather than dependent purely on subsidy and support all the time, and or a large corporate or otherwise, they are genuinely integrating themselves into the value chain so that they can effectively create cash economy at the ground level. And last but not the least, I think look at the whole policy framework, that how do we, our resources are not that large, how do we put our resources together and make schemes and policy in a manner that which can genuinely create those enterprises, and then use all the returning migrant labor or the farm hands to build up enterprises and really make the rural economy vibrant. So I'll stop here, and we can pick more questions later. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanjeev. Very, very interesting. And last but not the least, Prithvi, Zupakop, what are your thoughts to help us close off on the panel discussion?
Yeah, thanks, Irina. Thanks everyone for giving this opportunity. Actually, we are working in the staples category, and our part is that in these staples, post-harvest processing and packaging is a huge opportunity which can generate the rural jobs. Today already there are efforts being made by setting up a lot of FPOs or agripreneurs, but that has not been successful majorly. And the reason around it is I see there are 3 major impediments why they are not being successful. The number one is that free flow of agriculture sector is not yet legalized. If you see staples category, naturally the production centers are nationalized. Supply chain is nationalized. For example, what do I mean to say is, for example, urad is being produced. It will be produced mainly in, say, Western Rajasthan, or wheat. If we talk about it, it's a production centers are, say, in MP. So this is true for all staple category, that it's a production centers are national, not local. It means the supply chain has to be national. If for entire country wheat is produced in MP or part of Gujarat or Rajasthan, you can't take that to Tamil Nadu because of geography, geological conditions. So the production will always remain centered around some center, but supply chain has to be national. It means it has to liberalize, so movement becomes free. So that is the one challenge, that why the demand has not been democratized because of that. So if demand is not democratized, it is not accessible, easily actionable way to these small FPOs and agripreneurs. Of course, there is the challenge to that. The second thing which I see impediment is infrastructure and capital availability. And that's where I see a lot of enablers are today supporting. Government is supporting that. A lot of organizations like World Bank, NABARD, a lot of TRI, many NGOs are working to that. However, here also, as we are actually demand side, we are present in Mumbai and serve around 16,000 small stores, restaurants, and we procure across the country. So when our experience says that even that infrastructure which is being created, uh, it has to be such that the competitiveness of these small these FPOs or entrepreneurs remain there. When I say competitiveness means what you are producing through that infrastructure should be as good as a big mill which is giving the product. So you can't compromise on the quality of the product. But still there is a lot of good work being done here, and I think that work needs to continue to do that, so that it will help to do. But what is third critical element which is completely missing, and which is why in this staples category FPO and agripreneur has not been successful, is understanding of the demand parameters and availability of actionable demand at the ground. When I say demand parameters, for example, what should be the right packaging, what should be the grade, and our experience says, for example, like FPOs who are working in this segment, they treat the same way consumption pulses or whatever is staples for consumption same way as for tea production. They are two entirely different things, and the costing is entirely different, economics is entirely different. So what our suggestion and experience is, what we work is that the model which is to how should it be working. First thing is liberalization of the entire movement, which is in the fresh has happening, and therefore FPOs are more successful in the fresh category. The second thing which is important is there should be all the these enabler organizations and entrepreneurs when they work together. The third element should also come is the demand player should be there in that. So when you are with the demand player and the right input goes that what parameter I need the product, and if I need, then demand player's role is to ensure that he will take care of it, the demand part, and whatever intervention they will suggest, it means they will procure from that. And that is good for all the three, all because it will simplify the supply chain. Today's supply chain is so much of people between it is produced, and staple is a category which is produced once in a year but consumed throughout year. It means somebody will have to store it, somebody will have to, there would be product carrying cost, there would be the processing and everything will be there, which means so many jobs will be created, and we should look at the taluka level these things. So, and the demand player should be there, more demand player, it is better, but there should be broadest spectrum demand player also should be there. When I say broadest spectrum, they help to set the unit economics right and make the entire these FPO or agripreneur unit more competitive. For example, our experience is when you're procuring cashew, we don't only procure very high good grade one cashew W40, but when these FPOs process, there would be, the different 3-4 grades will come out. It's not only one grade. They can sell one grade to any best player, but what they will do with the entire basket of the grades? There is brokens will come out. So we help them where to sell it, or we procure and sell to our customers, So I think this is the model which will work, and I think it will really, make this happen. And see, the scale of this is immense. Why? Because naturally India is in the staple production, geographically India is blessed with that. Every geographical region has some unique staple coming, which means rice, pulses variety, or wheat, or spices, or dry fruits, So it means every taluka level can be unique. Product is anyway unique, which is given by the nature, It can be brought to the taluka level, and if it is processed in such a way where demand player enablers regulations as support these agripreneurs and FPOs, definitely can generate a lot of jobs. I can give you a simple example that today India has 5,500 talukas. If we are able to create 10 agripreneur or FPO units in one taluka and each employ 10 people, it just simply creates 5 lakh jobs immediately, and each providing such a unique product. And food is such a thing where consumer is also moving in the direction where they need traceability, where they need that, okay, where it is coming, which farm it is coming. So it is such that consumer behavior doesn't support scale, but consumer behavior says if you give me more localized, though I understand, for example, some staple is coming from distant part of say any state, but can you tell me where locally it is coming? So notion is local. So I think that is the right way to create that, and I think my thoughts are that.
Thank you, Prithvi. Very, very interesting. And to close us off today, folks, we have Srini Iyer from Ford Foundation. Srini, help us close this conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Irene. Thanks. At Ford, we are particularly interested in working with marginalized communities, and regions which are typically invisible. And within that, therefore, I thought I'd speak about non-timber forest produce that very often gets missed out in discussions. And we probably are not adequately aware of the immense role that it can play. For example, we are the world's largest producer of lac, and yet we do not have a single product line, a paint line in India, which is based on lac. Similarly, lac is also used for enteric capsules, for coating, etc. Similarly, we are also the world's largest producer of sal seed. And sal seed oil is a close replacement to cocoa butter, and yet none of our chocolate manufacturers turn to sal seed. So I'm just pointing out, similarly, if you look at tussar and the very limited consumption of tussar, for example, in home furnishings, even though it has phenomenal properties which make it very attractive as a material for home furnishings. I mean, this is just indicative of the immense demand that exists for non-timber forest produce, be it industrial, as I just mentioned. It could even be cultural, as we as a nation start shifting from plastic and thermocol in our temples to perhaps leaf plates, and medicinal uses as we get more and more conscious. Now, while there is immense demand, it's also something that's phenomenally potential for our topic, because as somebody else said, it has a very, very strong local multiplier, because it's not, I mean, it's the collection is virtually sort of cash input free. So everything that the producers or the collectors receive would be by way of money, which gets circulated locally. And also the first few steps in processing are very typically labor intensive. And yet, the NTFP-based processing is very, very limited. We have almost sort of fabulous details about how there are large sort of swathes of Indian forests which do not have even a single processing unit. Now, why that is not happening, there are several reasons, but let me at least mention three, because I'm sticking to the 3-minute limit. One is first of all, as a nation, we need credible information. I mean, it's we all know that information on lac markets, which is quantities, qualities, and prices, are typically controlled by traders, and they have an interest in manipulating data. Similarly, we have that for other NTFE commodities which have local oligopolies. And therefore, this should be a public good if we want to create competitive investor interest in these sectors. And therefore, we need the state to invest deeply in credible information on volumes related to NTFPs, as indeed was the investment on agri-commodities or weather or wherever. These are public good nature, and therefore it's best that the state invests. There's been very little effort in the past on that. The second is widespread support to stabilize and increase the volumes that are produced or collected. I mean, because it is natural resource space, there's volatility across years. However, and Ford has supported several initiatives across the country. With some investment, it's possible to both stabilize and increase local production and collection, and that offers a stable base for investors to come in and invest sort of bricks and mortar in processing units. And the third, and this would also include, therefore, securing rights of the collectors to harvest non-timber forest produce. We as a country have moved towards community forestry resources, which is a very good move. And that needs to be sort of further advanced, so that forest dependent communities feel secure that they can collect these NTFPs. And finally, we actually need a bit of what our World Bank colleagues said. We need a bit of ease of doing business at the level of the block or the district. So whether it's in terms of land acquisition locally, whether it's in terms of uninterrupted power supply, credit, And even if we are looking at sort of water and sewerage and movement of goods, in all of these, we need far greater advancement on the ease of doing business. That's not difficult. It just needs a certain amount of political will. So if we take these 3 steps, I believe we can have a much greater, not merely share of overall NTFPs processed very close to where they're collected, but also an expanded volume of NTFP processing, and in turn that could feed what I believe is immense potential demand. And the consequences for the rural poor, particularly tribals and other forest dependent communities, is that they get higher incomes as well as a higher share of the value of NTFPs. And in turn, that could generate a multiplier impact in terms of demand, particularly through rural construction. We've had a period in the recent past where there was a significant boost to rural construction, largely housing construction, because there was a certain increase in NREG incomes as well as farm incomes. So now, if forest-dependent communities also get a boost in income, we believe that could also, in a sense, activate the rural economy and in turn further create jobs. Let's stop here.
Hey, Srini, thank you so much for that. So folks, there we are. That's the panel discussion for you. And as I close out, let me just share with you 2 thoughts that have always struck me when I've looked at rural India. One is the way we classify it. I mean, if you look at rural India, it is Shyam Benegal's rural India, but it's also 50% of India's richest people. It's also a place that can be as competitive as any other place in India. It's also a huge market. It's also a series of human capital. So one of the thoughts that has always struck me is that in a country and a culture which is as old, as ancient as India, we are actually a very young economic system. And in this economic system, we always think of rural India as that poor rural India, when I actually think, it's a very vibrant economy with a huge opportunity for growth, not just as a market, but also as a source of production. So one is, can we reimagine the lens with which we think of rural India, and don't just think of it as these poor people who have to be subsidized and helped up, and don't just think of it as a political entity where the votes lie and which has to be managed every 5 years, but to think of it as a potential vibrant economic entity. And the moment you do that, I think what the panel shared with you was their thoughts, which said, you know what, in many ways, it's not different from any economic entity anywhere in India or anywhere else in the world. There are opportunities today which need to be scaled up. And for that, we need organization capacity of entrepreneurs, of leaders, of organization forms. We need more capital. We need risk management. There are entities there which can get scaled up, provided the market linkages are made better. And again, that's about infrastructure, it's about information flow, it's about risk management. And then most importantly, there are a whole bunch of entities that can be born if we make rural India, like urban India, more competitive. Now that competitiveness could come from better infrastructure, it could come from access to cheaper capital, it could come from the Indian government thinking about FTAs and about the rupee dollar conversion rate. But you know what, in many ways, not very different from what is needed to make urban companies more attractive. So I love this debate about rural economy. The only thought that I would leave you with is, it's not an area that needs support and sympathy. It's not an area that needs subsidy. It's a very vibrant part of India that needs to be made economically viable. And that requires investment, that requires right policies, it requires market linkages. And like every other place in India, it requires modern technology and manufacturing and management systems so that we can scale it up well. But let's hand it over to John. And before I do that, thank you so much for the panelists for your thoughts. And now John will share with you questions that have come. Some of them might be directed directly to you, and the others we will leave it open to the panel.
Thanks, Irina. It's a wonderful discussion. We've got some great questions, actually, very beautifully crafted, very relevant questions. I'll take the first one to Mr. Patra. The question, as I read it out, is the continued questioning is eating away the desire of micro entrepreneurs to step out of their comfort. They might go for daughter industries to distribute the turnover rather than break the ceiling. I request Mr. Patra to comment. So largely, how do we get small scale industries to break the ceiling to promote rural jobs?
Thank you for that question, whoever sent it in. It's an extremely relevant question, and I think it's something that not only I touched upon, but probably several other speakers touched upon when they talked about capacity and, or rather the lack of capacity and how do we deal with it. In her remarks a minute ago, Irina talked about the perception that we have of, people not being able to do things. The straightforward, answer or, approach we follow is not to cushion, right? In fact, that's probably one of the worst things you can do. And it's something that happens a lot in schemes, any kind of enterprise development scheme, training programs, etc., that are introduced for entrepreneurs. You need to, unleash a culture of entrepreneurship, and you can't do that by spoon feeding. So don't cushion is my, response to that. For people to stand up, be counted, break the glass ceiling, wherever that ceiling is set. And I don't quite understand, what the phrase daughter enterprises means, but it is, it is a question of capacity building, empowerment. Part of that is perception. We perceive that people don't have the capacity, but part of it is reality, right? And, I think Mr. Asthana pointed out quite rightly that that's an area that you need to work on, which is, something I think any right-minded organization is investing in. But there's another aspect, it's performance is not just about individual capacities. Performance is also about systemic conditions, or the ability to do something is about systemic conditions. And that's where I think our organization and a few others have been paying a lot of attention. Just to give you one example, at the district level in Haridwar, rather Roorkee, in Mirzapur, Bhadoi, 3 districts of Bundelkhand, the NCR region, Palwal, what we've done is we've created multi-stakeholder entrepreneurship coalitions. And, there isn't time to go into this in detail, but what we've done is we've created a collaborative structure where people from all kinds of different departments, entrepreneurs themselves, who would otherwise be working in silos, actually get together. And, they're sort of putting resources onto the table, which make it much more easier, much more possible for aspiring entrepreneurs to set up businesses. And at a very low cost, mind you, this is just the cost of a little bit of facilitation. In fact, our more mature coalitions are now, they sort of have their own momentum. Similarly, using the network of common service centers, we have entrepreneurship information kiosks, a growing network, right? So it's a question of, creating the kind of institutional architecture or institutional infrastructure that can do, many, if not all of the kinds of things, the solutions that our panelists have been talking about. And it's at that systemic level where I think inroads can be made with remarkable results.
Thank you. Thanks for that. I have another question directed to Anish. The question reads, given the fact that a majority of farmers are net food buyers, would there be an opportunity to create food processing units at the farm gate level itself? Do you want to take that?
Sure. And in some ways, they are, so PDS is one bit of it, and it is supplying. The Sanjeev's point that HVA is an opportunity is the route to take, and the route to take is to get this produce in the hands of consumers who have better paying capacity. One conversation we always have in context of dairy is sharing the consumer rupee. And you just look at the other segments. You look at cereals, you look at fruit and vegetables, you will see the way dairy has made it possible for increased share of farmer in consumer rupee. We haven't been able to do with the other value chains. And that's where, and that includes what Srini was saying with forest, which is minimal, as a collector, and you do not even factor in the waste that goes in picking it up. So there is a opportunity as net buyers, and in some places, if you look at the NFSA, in the NFSA Act, they had provided for local procurement and local distribution locally. Some efforts has happened. I think in Madhya Pradesh, they did come up with some guideline where they said that local procurement of millets, rice and could happen and could be distributed through within the district. It could happen. The other point I would like to pick here, John, is many of us during the conversation alluded to the institutional framework in the villages with women collectives coming in and FPOs. And FPOs we know are of all shapes and sizes. Some of them are ready to engage with the market. Some of them are, as you would say, subsistence engagement. So, but still look at just the numbers, the 65 million women organized across the country, and they have been aggregating individual members into various collectives at the village and at the cluster level. This power of this collectivization sometime back was used by Hindustan Lever to create a market to consumer connect through something like Shaktiyama and many others. And I know we have looked at insurance products going through that pipeline. The interesting opportunity now exists, and again, some state rural livelihood missions are trying that out, is getting produced to markets. And one has started looking at the cluster level federations where you have about 3,500, 4,000 odd women to come together and produce various goods. You have seen this across the country now with masks, PP, and there is again an opportunity, stitching opportunity, and in that segment. And Giri Saab talked about that, and one could multiply it there. So there, one thought I had, this would need skills, capital, technology, and business models. There would, by itself, the SHGs and the rural livelihood missions would not suffice. We need corporate partnerships to infuse some of this, the skills, tech, and the business models. Without that, the power of aggregation and all with the point that Sanjeev, you made on the ethical participation of the members, will come unstuck if we do not bring in better technology, better business models for them to come together. And that's a big opportunity. Thanks, John.
Thanks, Anish. We have about 10 minutes left. Just a time check. I have the next question from two people. I'll try and combine them. One is, can we compare rural and urban entrepreneurship? Considering the limited access to entrepreneurship resources, basic infrastructure, and lack of access to information, how fair is it to see them with the same lens? The second question is actually directed to Shrastant. I'll open it to the rest of the panelists as well. How do we make sense of ease of business at a district level because of fragmentation? So one is directed to Shrastant, but I'll open the broad question to the panelists to answer.
Should I just attempt a quick answer to that?
Sure.
The business route. Yeah, and I'm really sorry. I don't want to speak for too long. It's more or less what I was talking about earlier, but bears repetition, which is that the resources exist, and instead of a directed scheme-based kind of approach, and I'm using scheme as sort of code language because it's not just about the government. I think when private corporations try to make their supply chains more inclusive, it's also an extremely vertical arrangement. And instead of those kind of vertical arrangements, any system scientist who's looking at this problem and its complexity will tell you that you need to look at horizontal arrangements at, if not the village level, but maybe the block or the district level, because the resources exist there to make businesses, to make it much easier for people to do business. And the innovation lies in rejigging how people are able to work together, because if you can get that to happen, then much more is possible than what's happening right now by way of entrepreneurship and consequent job creation. Stop there. Thanks.
Thank you, Shashank. Does anyone else want to take a shot at the same question?
There's Srinivasan here.
Yeah.
It's a combination of two different strategies. One is are the horizontal strategies of ease of doing business, which which is broadly referred to in terms of deregulation, etc. While retaining safeguards, particularly environmental and labor safeguards, we also need to, but that's just necessary but not sufficient. We also need some vertical this thing which actually in a sense try and tilt the ways of doing business for specific resources given local endowment. So you need a bit of both. We've had experience in the country in the 80s at the district level. In fact, there were several districts in India and the National Commission on Development of Backward Areas, industrial estates, mixed results, I would say, but at least we can learn from where it went well and where it didn't go well. And we need to push that, maybe descale it by 1/10 or 1/20th, and even try and look at sort of block level clusters of facilities, because you need to spur that thing up.
Shankar here. Can I take a go at it?
Yes, please.
Right. On the ease of doing business, typically we talk about regulations and ease of regulations. So I would really like to comment upon, while ease of regulations is of course essential, there is another layer to it, which is a very, very high degree of change management or even mindset management. Let me take the example of the core problem in agriculture today. Gone are the days when we are talking about how can we produce more, and it's a production driven agriculture. Today the markets are very sensitive, consumer awareness is on a high, and therefore more and more agriculture needs to be attuned towards what the market needs. If you look at wellness foods, nutritious foods, those counters are increasing. People are becoming more and more aware about safe food, and in fact perhaps even willing to pay premium for that. And therefore the whole thing is shifting towards market orientation. And today a big problem faced by the farmers is more on market realization, and how do I get not only the reasonable market realization but stable market realization. So we have paid even 200 rupees a kilo for our favorite pulse, or 100 rupees a kilo for tomatoes. At the same time, there are times when milk is thrown on the road, tomatoes are not harvested, and therefore this wide fluctuation in realization is a big issue. Therefore, coming back to the regulations, while regulations are getting eased slowly, whether we are talking about contract farming, or we are talking about APMC regulations, or even Essential Commodities Act, when we look at, for example, marketeers boldly coming forward and tying up with farmers, they need the comfort that if a particular price is agreed, if the yield actually happens in the field, all that will come at that particular price. At the same time, the farmers also need assurance that the marketeers will step in and actually buy it at the contracted price and not take advantage of the market movements. I think the way contract farming regulations are done, more importantly, mindset change and implemented is very, very important. Similarly, when we are talking about marketeers buying directly, stocking norms and limitations on stocking, etc., needs a very different purview and free flow of the markets. I would also talk about in the same ease of doing business, there are a lot of government schemes. In fact, we can't complain there aren't enough in the areas of finance and insurance. But today, talk to a farmer, the trust level of you want to take an insurance policy, will I ever get a claim, is very, very poor. I would even put it as negative. Similarly, there are so many finance schemes available, so many government credit lines opened up, even what we have heard in the last couple of days. But the ease of availability of finance and insurance schemes, the skill of taking it to the farmer and making it happen at a field level, And the smoothness with which the whole thing is dispersed is really the thing to be done. So while frameworks are getting unfolded, I think the ease of execution is also a big issue. Thanks.
Great, thank you. I just want to take one really popular question quoted by a lot of people. How do we reimagine the post-COVID-19 world and create radical transformation? And especially, how do we not allow ourselves to conform to existing gender roles and limit women in traditional jobs and roles? So that seems to be a popular question, and a similar question is how how can we move from informal to formal in rural areas when it comes to jobs and the role of women in workforce in rural areas?
Can I come in?
Open to the entire panel, yeah.
Yeah, can I come in? I'm Giri.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. This is a very interesting question. How we are going to cope, after this COVID-19 as such, we have seen exodus of, workers, their families having, loads of things on their head and on bags, and they are moving towards their villages, Of course, it is a very natural kind of a thing when such kind of, pandemic situation is there, everybody wants to be nearer to their families or in their homes. This is but natural. Now, so far, there has been, as I said earlier, so far there has been, the plight of the people coming from rural areas to urban areas in search of livelihood as such. But now, situation has changed. People want to be there in their villages or to their near and dear ones. So naturally, the industry also will have to think, whatever the industry can think of, moving towards the rural areas. This is what we need to do. And particularly, I remember there was some survey done some time back, and there are 33 crores of women who are in the age of the employable age as such. And this is the silent power that rural India is having, and we are not tapping on this power as such. And one of the economists had rightly predicted, if we tap this rural silent power, female power, that our GDP can grow by 27%. This is the kind of a potential that we have. And we have not realized that potential. Now, this is the time. COVID-19 has given that opportunity to realize that one. So this is now, and now it is a time that we have to go back to the villages. Actually, the progress or the kind of thing what we want is in the villages. Only thing is that we need to create that kind of infrastructure over there. Now, why people are reluctant to go to villages? Because you don't have those facilities which they enjoy in the thing. You don't have the good schools. You don't have the good health facilities. You don't have the infrastructure as such. That is why you try to concentrate only in the urban area as such. But if this kind of a facility is given, there will be definitely a lot of people want to do business. And when we talked about the ease of doing business, of course, this has got to be taken, in the right spirit. The people or the agencies or the NGOs who are engaged in this particular thing, they have to really step in, guide the people, make the people understand, and at every stage, we will have to handhold them till the time they come up to a particular level. I think this is the time that transform our rural India and make them part of the big picture as such. This is what I feel about, this.
Thank you.
Just
Thank you so much for that.
Can I come in?
We just have, I'm really sorry about this. We're at 11:30. We would love to take your comments on this because the next panelist is waiting. I hope you don't mind. I would just want Irina to give her last closing comments. I'm really sorry. We just run out of time. We just want to keep a time check. But it was a great discussion.
I just want to thank Anish for putting this panel together, and for each of the panelists for being here and sharing their amazingly interesting thoughts. Those of you listening in, don't get worried if we contradicted ourselves. This is a huge elephant, and all of us were touching the part of the elephant that is closest to us and the one we understand the most. So thank you so much for being there. I wish all of us stopped thinking of rural India as rural and thought of it just as India, and then we'd be fine. Thank you so much, John, for organizing this.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. And that's Irina, a former partner at McKinsey & Co., advisor to several leading organizations across the world. Thank you, the panelists, for joining us. It was a great conversation. And what a last question leading up to our next session with Professor A.K. Shivkumar as well on the burden of the crisis on women and children and how do we address inequalities. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us.
John.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank
all.
you.
Thank you. all.
Thank you. It was a real pleasure. Yeah, I hope
Thanks,
to stay
Irina, for
Thanks,
connected.
everyone. Thanks, everyone.
Hope
Thanks,
to stay
Anish.
connected with everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.